You know, every Trump interview has a different energy to it, and in this one with Bloomberg, it's not even just the policy stuff he's throwing out there. It's like he's crafting an image, but
Yeah.
both for himself and the GOP. And it feels very deliberate, like it's aimed at a certain kind of voter.
Yeah, absolutely. And the timing is fascinating too, right? We're this close to an election, and he drops this interview where he's basically defining common sense as his party's whole thing.
Hmm.
But then you look at his list, borders, elections, trans issues, and it's like, come on. It's pretty clear who he's talking to here.
Right. It's those anxieties, right? Those very specific anxieties that a certain segment of voters have. He's saying this is what we stand for, but it also kind of feels like he's saying this is what they are afraid of.
It's textbook, really. You frame things this way, and you're not just eating positions anymore, it goes deeper. Some might call it fear, some might call it a longing for a simpler time, but it's powerful stuff, no doubt.
So is it effective? I mean, at this point, does this kind of rhetoric actually change anyone's mind, or is it more about getting the base fired up, do you think?
Probably a bit of both, to be honest.
Right.
There's a whole group of people for whom this straight-talking, anti-establishment persona is really appealing. They see it as a rejection of all the political correctness. So, yeah, it might not flip a ton of votes, but for those already leaning his way, it's huge for mobilization.
Okay, so that's the emotional side of it, but let's talk actual policy for a second. He goes back to his old bread and butter, right? The economy, talking tariffs, saying his presidency was inflation-free,
Yeah.
which, and I think we got to be careful here, isn't exactly the whole story.
Right. We got to be precise. Look, inflation was relatively low during his term. That's true. But to say there was no inflation, it's a bit misleading. There's a lot of factors that go into it, more than any one president can control.
Right, of course. But on tariffs, he really digs in. He even says something like, it must be hard for you guys to spend 25 years talking about tariffs being bad, and then somebody comes along and shows you you're totally wrong.
Classic Trump. He positions himself as the guy who sees what others don't, the guy who knows how the game is really played, even if it goes against everything everyone's been saying.
Uh-huh.
And for a lot of people, especially those who feel like they've been on the losing end of globalization and all that, it's a very compelling narrative.
And he knows exactly who he's talking to, that's for sure. There's this moment where he says, about the tariffs, that companies should just build their stuff here in the U.S. if they don't like it, and the audience goes wild.
Yeah.
What does that tell you about the people he's trying to reach?
Oh, man, it speaks volumes. It tells me they're worried about jobs. They're worried about factories closing and moving overseas. They want simple solutions to complex problems.
Yeah.
That applause, that's the sound of people longing for something, even if that something is kind of rooted in a past that maybe wasn't as rosy as we remember it.
Yeah, it all ties into this bigger image he's constructing, right? Trump is this ultimate deal maker, this strong man who can force other countries to play by his rules. Which brings us to foreign policy, where he spends a bunch of time talking about Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, all those guys.
And it's really something because those are the relationships that most people would consider the most volatile, the most potentially dangerous, right? But he presents them as proof of his strength. Like Ichi's is the only one who can handle these guys, these loose cannons. It's fascinating.
Which I guess for a certain kind of voter, that's reassuring. Like maybe it's better the devil you know, that kind of thinking.
100%. Especially if you're someone who's naturally wary of foreign entanglements and all that. The world feels like a dangerous place. And here comes Trump saying, don't worry, I'm the one who can keep us safe. It's a powerful message.
Until you get to the part about Taiwan, then things get really interesting.
Taiwan really does throw a wrench in things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You've got all that classic Trump bravado, but the situation itself, it's way more complicated than that. More dangerous even.
Yeah, and not everyone listening is going to be totally up to speed on this whole China-Taiwan thing. What's the quick version? Why does this matter so much right now?
All right, so basically Taiwan has its own government, its own military, the whole deal.
Mm-hmm.
But China, they say Taiwan's theirs, part of their territory. And for decades now, the U.S. has walked this line. Strategic ambiguity, they call it.
Hmm.
We haven't said we'd go to war for Taiwan if China attacked, but we also haven't said we wouldn't. Real balancing act, you see.
So we're trying to keep China from doing anything rash without, like, poking them with a stick at the same time. That's a tough needle to thread.
Exactly. And that's where Trump's whole approach gets really interesting. Because when they asked him flat out, would you defend Taiwan, he doesn't just say yes. Instead, he says China's only acting up because they know he won't be around after the election to keep them in line.
Which, needless to say, got huge applause from his supporters.
Oh, of course. Fits right into that whole image, right? He's the mastermind, the only one tough enough to handle China. But here's the thing. This isn't just campaign talk anymore. The stakes are way too high. Any misstep here, any misunderstanding, we could be talking about a major conflict, superpowers going at it.
Yeah.
The fallout would be huge globally.
So maybe those cheers from the crowd, a tad short-sighted when you put it like that.
Exactly. This is why understanding foreign policy matters, folks. The history, all the little details. It's not just about who sounds tough in an interview. It's about who can handle a situation this delicate without making things worse.
Right, okay, so zooming back out for a sec, we've got this interview, classic Trump the common sense thing, promises about the economy, talking tough on the world stage. But like you've been saying, a lot of this is aimed at a very specific audience, pushing buttons we know he's good at pushing. How do regular people watching this, how do they cut through all that and make a good decision when it's time to vote?
That is the million-dollar question these days, isn't it?
Right.
Especially with how much information is flying around, it's easy to get overwhelmed. I think the first thing is, remember, politicians are always putting on a show to some extent. They want to win, that's the goal, not necessarily tell you every little truth.
So healthy skepticism, always a good policy.
Always. Don't just go by the big moments, the applause lines. What are the policies they're actually talking about? What have they done in the past? Who are they trying to reach with this message, and what are they promising those people? It's about looking deeper.
So don't just listen to what they're saying. Look at what they've done and try to figure out what they're really selling, which, let's be honest, sometimes feels impossible.
It's work, no doubt, but it's
Yeah.
important work. Because you know what they say, we get the leaders we deserve. If we make choices based on, gut feeling instead of looking at the facts, well, don't be surprised when things don't turn out how you hoped.
So how do we get better at spotting that, all the spin and the BS? How do we become better at, consuming political news without getting tricked?
A couple things come to mind. One, mix up your news sources.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just get it from one place, whether it's Facebook or whatever your favorite cable news channel is.
Mm-hmm.
Find different perspectives, even the ones you think you'll disagree with.
See the whole picture, not just the side you already agree with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Two, sweat the details a little. Don't stop at the headline. Look at the actual policies, what they've done before, what might happen if they get their way. And lastly, don't be afraid to ask questions. If something doesn't make sense, if you're not sure where someone stands on an issue, look it up. Talk to people. Don't just go along with it.
So less going with your gut, more actually thinking critically about things.
That's the ticket. The smarter we are, the harder it is to fool us.
And that feels especially important when it's something like this, foreign policy. The stakes are so much higher, like you were saying before, one wrong move, and there are ripples all over the world.
No doubt. And that's why all the nuance matters, the history, all of it. Because it's not just about what's happening here. It's about the whole web of relationships and conflicts going on globally. It's a lot.
Okay, so we've done the common sense thing. We've dug into the economic stuff, this whole foreign policy puzzle. But there's this other part of the interview that I think is worth talking about. The way Trump keeps bringing up his personal relationships with all these other world leaders. Like he's saying, I know how to deal with these guys, trust me.
Oh, that's classic strongman playbook right there. Project this image. Only I am strong enough to handle these loose cannons on the world stage.
And for a lot of people, especially if they're already a little scared of what's going on in the world, that's comforting to hear, right? Like, maybe it is better the devil you know.
100%. If the world feels dangerous, and here's a guy saying, don't worry, I've got this, that's appealing to a lot of folks.
Until, of course, we get to Taiwan, and then things get really interesting, because this is where it gets real, right? Taiwan kind of blows up that whole better the devil you know thing, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. With Taiwan, it's not just talk anymore, It's not just some theoretical threat or some strongman posturing. We're talking about a very real possibility of a conflict, and not just any conflict, one that could draw in the whole world.
And his answer to the Taiwan question specifically, if he'd defend them if China made a move, it wasn't straightforward. Let's just say that.
Nope, not at all. He's basically saying, just the thought of me being back in charge, that'll be enough to scare China straight.
Yeah.
Which, again, plays right into this image he's cultivated, right? The master strategist, the only one tough enough to keep everyone else in line. But you got to wonder, at what point does that kind of thinking become dangerous? Like, are we really banking on everything going perfectly to plan when the stakes are this high?
So for people who aren't following this stuff super closely, who aren't glued to every development in the South China Sea, how does this kind of talk land? What are they hearing?
That's the big question. Some people, they hear that strongman message and they like it. They want someone who's not afraid to be aggressive, who they see as a protector. But the flip side is, this is exactly how you simplify incredibly complicated situations into something they're not. Foreign policy, it's not a campaign slogan. There are real lives at stake.
It's not just about picking someone with the best zinger in a debate, right? We're choosing someone who's going to be making decisions that impact millions, maybe billions of people.
100%. And that means we have to look past all the noise, all the rhetoric. What are the potential consequences of these policies, not just here, but everywhere? That's the stuff that matters.
So as we head into this election, maybe the biggest takeaway here is be skeptical. Don't take anything at face value.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Don't be afraid to ask tough questions.
Yeah.
Don't just listen to the loudest voices or be swayed by the simplest answers, because the world is messy and complicated. Demand substance, demand actual plans, not just talk.
Because ultimately, yeah, we get the leaders we deserve, don't we? If we don't demand better, well, we can't be too surprised if we don't get it.
That's the truth. All right, that'll do it for this deep dive. We appreciate you listening, and we'll catch you next time.